Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the myths surrounding the Battle of Gettysburg.
Number 1, there was a shoe factory in Gettysburg, and the shoes were the main cause of the battle.
Well, this myth, as it's developed over the years, was actually started by Henry Heath in his memoir of the Civil War, where he actually mentioned that the reason that they were coming to Gettysburg on the morning of July 1st was to get shoes. And that he came to Gettysburg and accidentally ran into General Buford's cavalry and the battle started. Now, in point of fact, they weren't coming to Gettysburg to get shoes. The battle was fought at Gettysburg because the roads lead here. It was the center of commerce and industry in this area. And a network of 10 roads ran in and out of our town at the time. And when you read the official reports of the Army, it's obvious that they're going to meet at this town. And prior to the battle, Robert E. Lee ordered for the concentration of his forces in the Gettysburg area. And so the shoe thing is sort of a side story that has become told in book after book on the battles. Matter of fact, it was even a question on Final Jeopardy. But the other thing about this myth is that we don't have a shoe factory in the town at the time of the battle. And so that's a serious issue with the story. There are cobblers like any other town in the area, but no shoe factory.
Number 2, the first day of battle was not that bad.
Yeah, I think people tend to overlook the first day's fighting. And that might be because there's so much action that occurs on July 2nd and July 3rd. Of course, July 2nd being the bloodiest single day of the battle, and July 3rd being Pickett's charge, the first day gets overlooked. But taken by itself, the first day, percentage-wise, is one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. And it was heavy fighting on July 1st. As a matter of fact, there were more casualties on July 1st than on July 3rd. The other thing is that in a lot of general histories of the battle, the first day's action kind of gets overlooked. In the Ken Burns Civil War series, I think he refers to the first day as a mere skirmish. Of course, again, they're comparing that with the fighting on July 2nd. The other reason that the first day is kind of passed over sometimes is a lot of the histories of the battle were written by the Northerners. And the Northerners, maybe they don't want to talk about the first day of the battle because the South won.
Tell me the myth about the horse's hooves.
So this is probably one of the most asked questions I get giving tours of the battlefield. Hey, what's that story about the horse's hooves and the fate of the rider? And the story goes something like this. If you look at an equestrian statue at Gettysburg, you can tell the fate of the rider by looking at the position of the horse's hooves. If the horse has one hoof in the air, the rider was wounded during the fighting. If the horse has two hoofs in the air, the rider was killed. And this is a story that really first started and it was popularized by early battlefield tour guides after the monument to John Fulton Reynolds was erected on the first day's battlefield. The artist of that monument, I believe Henry Kirk Bush Brown, he actually, according to Brown, he wanted to show that his sculptor had proper balance. So he lifted two horses' hooves in the air, and the mold, or the clay model, was just resting on 2 points. The fact is that only one equestrian statue on our battlefield has two hooves in the air, and that rider, General John Fulton Reynolds, coincidentally, was killed in the battle. And General Winfield Scott Hancock, that has an equestrian statue, he was wounded in the battle, and coincidentally, his horse has one hoof in the air. Basically, that's the story. Other people take it further, though. They say that it was a rule adopted by sculptors at the time, or that it was a convention used in European statues. And none of these things are true. It was not done on purpose. It was not a rule. It was not a convention done by artists. There was a really nice article on the internet written about the equestrian statues in Washington, D.C. And there are about 30 equestrian statues in that city, and it doesn't work on 20 of them, the story. Of course, people say, oh, no, it's only Gettysburg. And then, there's lots of ins and outs of the story. But the important thing to know is it's a coincidence, and it's just not true.
Gettysburg as a town was nothing before the Civil War.
Well, I think for dramatic purposes, a lot of books on the battle say that the fighting occurred at a small, unimportant farming community. And when you look into it, our town, Gettysburg or Gettysburg, depending on how you want to pronounce it, it is the center of industry and commerce in this area. It is the county seat of Adams County. And because of that, this network of roads developed here. And it is, population-wise, the largest town in our county. And to get to a larger comparable town in each direction, you have to go to Chambersburg or York or Frederick. So it's a pretty sizable town, and there was a thriving industry and commerce here prior to the Civil War. And there's every reason to believe, had the battle not been fought, and the battlefield park placed around our town, it would have continued to grow, and today would be a really large developed area. So the battlefield has actually kind of restricted the growth of our town and kept us a small community.
Pickett's charge was set up purposely to fail.
A lot of people maintain that General Longstreet was not happy with Robert E. Lee during the battle. So General Longstreet, who was placed in charge of the massive assault on July 3rd, they suggest did things to ensure that the attack would fail. I think this is just preposterous. And it comes out of the post-war rhetoric that was being put forth by, I just call it the Virginia contingent, in an effort to make Longstreet a scapegoat for failure at Gettysburg and build up Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee ordered the charge. It was his idea. It was basically his plan. And although Longstreet does write that he, thought the attack would fail, I think Longstreet does his best to implement Lee's plan and really doesn't undermine him the way some people suggest.
The Battle of Gettysburg was an accident.
A lot of people also like to suggest that the battle was an accident. And this is another thing that comes from General Henry Heath. I think early on after the Civil War, we had accounts of the battle by the Northerners who were involved in it. And Henry Heath, who actually had an interview and an article about the battle, and then later his memoir came out, people gravitated towards his writings because it was a Southern version of the first day's battle. And he's the one who comes up with the term accident. Yeah, Gettysburg was an accident, except for both armies are marching towards each other, looking for each other with the express intent on meeting and killing each other. Besides all that, it was an accident. Though it's just an unfortunate word that Henry Heath uses that has continued to be repeated. And I guess, to me, it conjures up the idea that both armies are kind of wandering into Pennsylvania and they accidentally back into each other without realizing it. No, both armies were looking for each other, and both armies had taken steps to order for the concentration of their army at Gettysburg. There was no accident, and there was no accidental meeting. So the only accident would be that they don't know exactly when they're going to meet or where they're going to meet. And it just so happened that the battle started at this location. And I guess that is the accidental part, that they don't know where this collision, the time or place of this collision specifically.
Devil's Den was from the Ice Age.
This is one that I encountered early on, even before I was a tour guide. Everybody knows I'm really into rocks and I'm really into Devil's Den. But there's a story, and it is put forth in many books, that Devil's Den was formed during the last Ice Age. Now, here's what's really interesting about this. The last Ice Age was about 10,000 years ago, give or take. And Devil's Den is diabase, an igneous rock formation. And this is igneous rock that was pushed up through the center of the earth, according to the Pennsylvania Geological Survey, 201.2 million years ago. So the people that suggest that Devil's Den was formed during the Ice Age are off by 200 million years. It's harder to imagine someone being that mistaken in a fact.
Now we got a bonus question. In your opinion, how do you pronounce the G word?
Well, this is something that I've talked a lot about. And, I'm very comfortable with people calling it Gettysburg or Gettysburg. And the fact of the matter is that our town was founded by a guy named James Geddes. And I know some of the descendants of the Geddes family that live in North Carolina. I've spoken to descendants of the family that live in Tennessee. And currently, last year, I spoke to a guy who lives in Las Vegas who's directly related to the family. And the first thing I do when I talk to someone new from that family, how do you pronounce your name? And they always say Geddes. So it's founded by James Geddes. The family is the Geddes family. So obviously the proper pronunciation of the name is Gettysburg. But, I have this really interesting story. In 2000, I was part of the Adams County Bicentennial Tour, where we put locals on a tour bus, and I must have done the tour 20 times. And we rode around the county and we visited towns and we visited historic sites. It was an all-day tour and people just loved the tour. And on one of the tours, I was coming back into the town and I pronounced the name of the town. And I don't even remember which way I pronounced it at that time. And I often say Gettysburg or Gettysburg, depending on the situation. But I pronounced the name of the town. And this guy in the back of the bus, who was a local resident of the town, had lived here all his life, his family lived here, he started to argue with me and say, you're pronouncing the name wrong and you keep pronouncing the name wrong. And he took one of the two pronunciations, and I don't even remember which one he said. And then another resident of the town who grew up here and his family was from here stood up and said, no, you're wrong. And they started arguing with each other about the pronunciation of the town's name. So here was two long-term residents that couldn't agree how to pronounce the name. So there is no one pronunciation. And so, I'm pretty lenient on people who use both of them. But you might know, my first act as official county historian was to point out to people that it probably should be pronounced Gettysburg, since that's the name of the town. Throwing a monkey wrench in this is that James Geddes' father, he's shown his tavern and his mill is shown on several early maps and surveys. And there's a few times when his name is spelled with an A, which I think must be because that's how someone heard it pronounced. So maybe he pronounced it Gaddis. So maybe it's Gettysburg. Well, thanks for watching our videos here at the Adams County Historical Society, and make sure to click the subscribe button on the post.